Welcome, everybody, to another brand new episode of the Jedi Way here on the Outlaw Nation channel. And I think if you're watching this on the day we put this out, it's the last day of 2020. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, also known as Rocha Fed, here joined as always by Laura Kelly. Laura, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for 2020 to be over, I think, like most people. And I've been taking the last week or so to, decompress after The Mandalorian. It's
Yeah.
the season finale. We haven't talked about it much, but like, man, I was really happy to like kind of dive into a different era to prepare for this episode of today.
Yeah. To talk about The Mandalorian, we did do a review episode on my other show, The Geek Buddies, which Laura was very kind to come on and do the review with us. I think it's the most viewed thing this side of my first live stream so many moons ago. So pretty awesome reaction from a lot of people for that review for sure. And people clamoring to have you back on The Geek Buddies. Sure, I'm sure down the road we will definitely be exploring that more with you. But yeah, you talk about today, what we're getting into today is the Bad Batch. This also, as people talk about 2020, Laura just mentioned how it kind of sucked and overall, but there were some really good things that happened in 2020. One of them being season 7 of the Clone Wars, getting reacquainted with the Clone Wars, and of course, being introduced fully and officially to the Bad Batch, and then finding out that they are being spun off into a series that's only months away, Laura, in 2021 already. So this must have been in the works. Let me tell you, as someone who's done voiceovers, understands animated series, Michael and Shannon both work in animated series, it takes a long time to bring an animation thing to life and to bring it up on the screen and get it ready. The fact that we're getting it so soon in 2021, we're only months away, really speaks to the long-term plans they've had for the Bad Batch for quite some time.
It does, and it's kind of interesting because we've seen some characters cameo in the trailer
Mm,
that we've seen from the Bad Batch, and the fact that we've got to see those characters first in the Mandalorian,
yeah.
sort of interesting when you think about the timeline of how long that this show must have been in the works and in planning pre-production stages and in animation and getting the voiceover. I mean, it must have taken so long, and it's crazy
Mhm.
to think of how much of the Mandalorian was probably already in process with that too concurrently. I love the idea that they were working on these two things so that they can make sure that the story connected in this small way, even if that small way is Fennec Shand.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of that as we talk about the Bad Batch and Fennec Shand, what we might expect. We'll explore the history of the Bad Batch, then talk about what the reactions were to them coming back, and then, of course, explore what we might be seeing in the season based on the trailer that was released during the Disney Investor Day. But the first thing I want to ask you, real quick, before we jump into that, though, Laura, is you just mentioned a couple of things that made me think about it. All this stuff is starting to work now in Star Wars in tandem in a way that maybe was a bit rocky initially when Kathleen Kennedy first stepped into the chair. But it seems like now, over the last few months, things are starting to connect up. And a lot of people want to give credit to Filoni and Favreau. But do you think Kathleen Kennedy deserves a little bit of credit for also kind of being there to supervise it happening, shepherding it happening, all of that? I mean, some people even claim that Kathleen Kennedy didn't even care about Clone Wars and like turned away from it, was focused on other things, didn't care about The Mandalorian. And I find that really hard to believe. I can't believe that a woman who's so knowledgeable about how to shepherd a lot of franchises to fruition would not have been aware about every little thing and how it's connecting up.
Exactly. I mean, the connection part of it is, I think, where she would have to be involved to some extent, given how many projects are in the works at this time, and given how many of them are going to be connecting with each other. And you're right. I don't think people give her enough credit. And the most of the complaints that I've had about Kathleen Kennedy have revolved around the race issues that have come up in the sequel trilogy when John Boyega brought them up, and
Right.
Oscar Isaac sort of was hinting at it at some point as well. That kind of mismanagement of things are the
Mhm.
issues that I have with Kathleen Kennedy. I have no issues with the projects that have been in development and, how she sort of handles the development of things, because from what we've seen in all of these projects that have rolled out, everything has been pretty successful. You talk about season 7 of the Clone
Mm.
War, talk about the Mandalorian. It's really kind of the sequel trilogy where you get into a lot of the controversy about how fans feel. But
Yeah.
I kind of think that at least the Mandalorian and the Clone Wars they were pretty universally loved
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you bring up the race issue as well, because that kind of popped up again earlier this week, Laura. There were reports from that Alan Dean Foster had to nix a Ray and Finn romance in his adaptation of the trilogy books that he was writing there, based on the sequel trilogy that we got. So that once again kind of popped up, this idea of an interracial romance in Star Wars. Of course, species and humans can have something going on, but God forbid black and white get together in Star Wars. What was your reaction to that when you saw that bit of news drop a few days ago?
I mean, I can't say that I'm surprised that he
Yeah,
had in that direction. I mean, also given how many sort of hands were on the script
yeah,
of The Force Awakens, I think it was kind of any man's guess as to where they were planning to take the story. I mean, you had
yeah.
so many different people working on different treatments for that script, and who knows what the version that Michael Arndt turned in. He was, I think, the
Right.
person who worked on the first draft. I mean, if Alan Dean Foster is working off of previous drafts of previous scripts, then it's one of those things where you have no idea what he was using for reference material. So I
Yeah.
can't say that it surprised me, because even at the end of The Force Awakens, there was a lot of, I feel like there was a good population of fans who were sort
Mhm.
of hoping for that Finn Ray ship to become a thing.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I can't say it surprised me at all, but I am sort of surprised to see Alan Dean Foster coming out and talking about these things now,
Yeah.
especially given the news that he's been sort of battling with Lucasfilm to get the rights to, or I guess, what was it, the royalties. He hasn't been paid for the novelization of A New Hope that came out, I
Right.
think, right before the movie. So he's been in the news a little bit this week. It's been sort of interesting to watch it all go down.
It's funny. I remember meeting him at Comic-Con. He was just sitting on a folded table and chair on the corner of one of these places, signing books. Man, he was just sitting there, just signing books. It was real easy to walk up and just get a book and signed from him. So now that he's going back and forth, and I remember people were excited to have him back. But apparently he's shaking that tree a little bit because of the royalties situation, and so be it. It's certainly his right. But anyway, yeah, okay. So that was more to wrap a little bit of that. Moving into the Bad Batch here. Yeah, we got into season 7 here, Laura. We had Hunter come back, Tech, Wrecker, and Crosshair. Got reacquainted with them. I know there was something in 2015 at Celebration. Can you clarify for people what that was? That they originally had kind of composed a Bad Batch storyline or arc for them. There was some initial animation. There was even some footage shown, but it was not what they eventually used fully in the season 7 of Clone Wars that dropped this year.
Yeah, as I understand it, and I wasn't at Celebration in 2015, and I haven't actually seen that presentation, but from what I understand, they showed. I think they got through a script, they got through a lot of recording the dialogue, and they got through storyboarding, and they got through some of the animatics. And
Yeah.
what was shown at Celebration 2015, I believe, was some of those animatics, so you can kind of see what it was originally supposed to be.
Yeah.
The story arc that was going to be in season 6 originally of the Clone
Yeah.
Wars.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I haven't actually seen it, but I know that there were a lot of story elements that they kept. There were a handful of things that they changed. But sort of the feel of it, as I understand it, was very similar to what we got in season 7.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that. What was your overall impressions? You rewatched the 4 episodes, their 4 episode arc in preparation for this episode of the Jedi Way, Clone Force 99, also known as Bad Batch, doing their thing over those 4 episodes, kind of leading the way with a number of the battles that were going on here. And of course, recruiting Echo, or Echo recruiting himself into the Bad Batch to go forward into the animated series. Take us through the 4 episodes, and what was your feeling about it overall?
Well, my feeling on them, I think, would have been very different if they had done a sort of mass upload of all of the episodes of the Clone Wars
Mm,
season 7. The week by week process was something I sort of struggled with, because I was raring to get to the Ahsoka stuff,
right.
and I had to get through 4 episodes of this first. So I remember watching this the first time when season 7 came out and feeling very impatient to get through this storyline, because it just wasn't as interesting to me. And I
Okay.
didn't get a chance to listen to the episodes of my show, but I'm pretty sure I'm on record of saying I don't enjoy this. I would like to move forward to a different part of the storyline, please. But then probably by the end, I probably had changed my tune, being like, oh, I like this arc. If they're going to continue the story, if they're going to pick it back up with Echo, I would love to see where that goes. If it's a book, if it's a comic or something, I would check that out. I did
Right.
not anticipate that it was going to be a show. So that was surprising to me when they announced it in July 23rd, or it was July of this
Yep.
past year, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we dive into this whole story arc that's mostly taking place sort of in the atmosphere of Anaxis and on Anaxis, which is fun because we see Anaxis again in Star Wars Rebels. So that was interesting that they brought that in.
Right.
But I really enjoyed the storyline of referring back to earlier seasons of the Clone Wars. I think a lot of people had gone through and just done a sort of massive rewatch of the series. And so we're kind of picking up on a storyline that we left off in season 3, the Citadel arc, where Echo allegedly dies. As it turns out, he did not. Where we pick up in the story in season 7, it seems that Wat Tambor has somehow gotten his hands on him. He's the head of the Techno Union, and he's hooked him up to all these machines, and they're basically using his brain to counterattack the Republic. They've built this algorithm from all the analytics that they've gathered from Echo's brain, uploaded him to a system, and so it takes the Bad Batch plus Rex to go in and save him from, I think he ends up on Skako Minor, so part of the arc takes place there. We get some really fun aliens that kind of look like they're straight out of the Avatar movie.
That's for sure.
Yeah, they're kind of fun. Poltex, I believe, is the species. So we spent some time with them on Skako Minor, and basically where we end up once we see Anakin's dark side come out and him take down Admiral Trench of the Separatists, we see Echo have to make a choice of, does he go back to the Republic and become a soldier and fight alongside Rex again, or does he kind of dive into this different path that he's been set on with the 4 members of the Bad Batch? And they're an interesting group. I think they're very well balanced. So I think one of the things I'm looking forward to the most is sort of what Echo brings to the table and how he balances out the group in that sort of way. So do you have any sort of initial reaction to this story arc when it first came out? Did you have the same thing with me where you were like impatient to sort of get to the next thing, or were you sort of enjoying the slow pace of this?
No, this is my Star Wars. I mean, this is what I want to see from Star Wars. The more grittier stuff, the stuff that is an homage to the 70s and 60s films that influenced Lucas coming into creating Star Wars, certainly as a filmmaker in the 70s himself, eventually doing what he did with American Graffiti and Star Wars and all of that. But seeing this, there's remnants here of the Western stuff, right? We've talked about the Western influence, the samurai influence within The Mandalorian, but certainly the Western influence here with general Star Wars overall. And this idea of this is almost like the Wild Bunch, that old Western with Ernest Borgnine and Robert Ryan and a number of other people here involved in that, where they go on one final mission, and they're all different characters. It's shades of the Dirty Dozen, shades of Seven Samurai, the shades of a group of people that come together that are kind of, oddballs or not quite 100% like everyone else, but they have this unique spark, this unique thing that separates them from everybody else. And, they even derisively call the other clones regs, that idea of like, we are our own thing. We've owned our uniqueness. We've owned, in essence, our, I don't want to say deformity, but I would say our unusualness, because we don't think like everybody else. We're not groupthink. We're not sheep. And I love that. They're rebellious. I'm not calling the outlaw because I, follow the lines. I love the fact that they do their own thing. Plus, there's a lot of shades of the 80s stuff, Hunter designed like that character, I think Sonny from Predator. So it's like all of that has a real strong connection for me. And the fact that they're all uniquely different characters that have uniquely different skills. Right? Wrecker always being the big dude, handles stuff. You got Tech, who's handling all the intelligence stuff. Crosshair is the sniper, and then Echo comes in as more of a connection to the overall general clone population. There is great to have as kind of a bridge between the two as well. It's a brilliant element to add to this. So for me, I was excited by this. And when the arc was over, all I did was say to myself, God, if this becomes a TV show, I'm going to just watch this every week and love it because of the idea of how unusual they are. And I connect to it because of how unusual I feel about myself in terms of normal compared to normal people. And so there's that kind of element within it as well. And for that alone, I loved it. And I actually found that to be my favorite part up until we got to the last 4 episodes of this previous season of Clone Wars. The Ahsoka stuff was fine, but I just felt like the first 4 episodes and those last 4 episodes were my kind of Star Wars. So yeah, that's why I'm excited about seeing what happens in this series.
Yeah, desirable mutations, I think, is the word that they
I love
use
that.
to describe, this group. So let's get into him a little bit. We've
Yeah.
got Hunter, who initially we sort of, when we first meet him, we don't really know what his like superpower is right off the bat. We kind of just meet him and are introduced to him as the leader of
Mhm.
the group, who is kind of the person who can tolerate the rest of them, I guess.
Yeah.
But we later learn that he has finely tuned senses which can like tap into the vibrations of a planet into the point where he can actually sort of act as a human map, which is really bizarre. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's a point to it, and so I think that skill is going to come in handy at some point. And we saw a little bit of that in the Clone Wars in their
Mhm.
arc, but that was sort of a fun one. And yes, his character design. Which movie? I mean, classic character is it Rambo that people
Yeah,
are
well,
comparing his
he's
look
got a little
to?
bit of the Rambo facially, but the red bandana is definitely a shout out to what's his face, Sonny in Predator. I think that's the character's name, the Native American character, the huge Native American character there, who says, "I ain't got time to bleed." So there's a combo within that, which is why immediately, as a lover of those '80s action films, it immediately connected me with Hunter for sure.
Yes, and then we also have Tech, who is
Mm.
the brains of the operation. He's our sort of computer tech nerd, and he's a lot of fun. He's skinnier. He's one of them. I think him and Crosshair look significantly
Mm.
different. I feel like than the
Yeah.
rest of the clones. He sort of looks like the villain in the movie Ratatouille. Just the way that they've been designed. Him and Crosshair, it's sort of strange. But
Okay.
Crosshair is the quiet, sort of grumpy sharpshooter of the group.
Right.
Definitely a little bit more sarcastic, a little darker than the rest of them. And then Wrecker. This is my favorite new word that I've learned recently is a
Oh.
himbo. It's the male equivalent of a bimbo. He's a himbo. And he's a little bit of he's the strong man of the group. So he brings the
Yeah.
muscle. He also brings a ton of the comedic relief though. I enjoy him
Right.
very much for that reason.
Great. Well, let me ask you something. Does he remind you of a certain character from Star Wars Rebels?
Does he remind me of Zeb, maybe?
Yes.
Is that what
That's
you're getting at? Because
that's what I'm getting at.
I never thought Zeb was that funny, and I think that Wrecker
What?
is
Really?
very, very funny. I mean,
Okay.
I guess in terms of all of the story and all of the time that we spent with
Hmm.
Zeb, overall, we didn't get as much like percentage funny that we did, I think, with Wrecker. It stands out a
Okay.
little bit because he stands out much more as the comedic relief for me.
I guess more so the fact that they're both like these muscle men in essence, these strong men of the group. Record certainly handling his business there, and Zeb doing the same. But Zeb also ball busting Ezra every chance he could. But with Wrecker, he's more of like I don't know. He's almost more of the more infantile, more immature-ish rather fighter there because Hunter's always constantly kind of having to pull him back. Yet there are moments where Wrecker really comes through when he's throwing everybody, up that chute to get out of that situation. There, he's got his skills and he's got his positive points too. But he's called Wrecker, which means he likes to destroy stuff, and so I enjoy that about that character as well.
Yeah, we get a lot of really fun moments, especially I think it's the last episode of this arc. It's episode 4
Mm.
in season 7 of the Clone Wars, where we see Wrecker get to pretty much like mow down a bunch of battle droids
Yeah.
in one scene when they're on Admiral Trench's ship. And then, of course, Anakin retrieves a detonator at some point in that episode, and then specifically saves it so he can give it to Wrecker, so he can actually be the one who blows everything up of the Separatist Armada in that episode. So it's a lot of fun. He's
Yeah.
a wildly interesting character. I'm excited to see sort of where maybe if we learn a little bit more of like the origin of
Mm.
these characters. That's something that I hadn't thought about much of whether or not we would get that in this series, or if this was supposed to sort of be our origin story for each of them. We're not going back too far in time.
Mm.
This is just our introduction here. I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, and I think, obviously they're named for 99, that droid there on, I think it was on Camino, who was like, he wasn't fully formed and helped a lot of those units out. Certainly got that award from Heavy and what happened in that sequence as well later on when he finds out what happened to Heavy. All of that is there. That's their like spirit animal, right? This idea of, that people think that we can't be useful, but we can. And what is the formation of this group? How did they come together? And then the origin of each of these clones and how they navigated their worlds to find each other and then create this this group that they have now, and the missions that they're going on here. Because remember, this is what, after Order 66. We saw in the trailer. We're going to get into the trailer in just a second, but we did see in the trailer, like, Palpatine's in this thing, Grand Moff Tarkin's in this thing. So are these guys now part of this? Are they carrying out missions, or are they against their own clones, their own troopers? Are they doing their own thing? Are they a mercenary group? I don't know. And so for me, this is what is going to be fascinating to discover about this. And then you throw in Fennec Shand as well in this, Laura. You know, Fennec Shand is a mercenary herself. So are these people going to be on the good side or the bad side? And we're seeing the Book of Boba Fett. Is the Book of Boba Fett about the good side or the bad side? So, I mean, this is a lot of challenging decisions by Disney and Lucasfilm for the fans to dive into and navigate for themselves what side of the fence they are on with these characters. I appreciate the boldness of them willing to do this.
I do too. I think what I'm most excited for, and we saw a little bit of it in the trailer, is getting to see Order 66 from a different point of view. I was sort of hoping to see a little bit more of that at the end of season 7 of the Clone Wars.
Right.
All we really saw was sort of what was going on with Ahsoka and Maul and Rex, of course, and that's fine. I mean, that was great, but we were just on one single ship that entire time, and I had sort of hoped that maybe we would be in other parts of it, or just seeing flashes kind of like we did in the film Revenge of the Sith as well. So I'm excited for that. That's what's, I think, going to be really interesting. We see a little hint of Palpatine giving his, reorganized into the First Galactic Empire speech that we hear in Attack of the Clones. So in Revenge of the Sith. So I'm excited to see that. It looks like he's sort of giving it to like gigantic battalions of clones in whatever planet that they're on in the trailer. And it's going to be wild. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw where they popped up in the Clone Wars. What do we anticipate in terms of characters? Do you sense any Clone Wars characters jumping over into this series, into the Bad Batch series, at all? Or do you think this will be completely new with new characters coming in, new villains and everything like that?
I hadn't given much thought to the idea of like Ahsoka or Rex or someone showing up. We don't really know too much about what happens to Rex in between the end of the Clone Wars and where we pick back up with him in Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of interested to see maybe if he shows back up, if he goes into hiding at some point. Well, we know he goes into hiding, but if he tries to track down Echo by whatever means he can. That would be an interesting dynamic to bring in, to see. Then you're already adding Echo to this sort of already established group. What's it going to be like when Rex, who was a former leader in his battalion, also is thrown into that mix? Yeah. I don't know necessarily if we're going to see that. Probably not. I don't think we're going to see anyone like Ahsoka. Like, that feels like more major. And I think something like that might be upstaging our group a little bit. We would want to stay focused on the core story, which is these 5 characters.
Yeah, I wonder, because I mean, we saw it in Rebels. We saw characters pop in, and Ahsoka certainly did. We saw Hondo. We saw a bunch of characters roll through Rebels that we had seen in other things before. We saw new characters, of course, populate Rebels all throughout, including with that main cast. But Clone Wars had people popping in and out with Yoda and other people and characters rolling through. So it would surprise me if they didn't. The Ahsoka thing, I hear your point. I could see that happening. I really could. We're already getting Fennec Shand, but already people are wondering about the Ahsoka series, who we're going to see in the Ahsoka series, who we're going to see in the Kenobi series. So you might be right. Maybe they just kind of look at the Bad Batch as like, look, let's let these clones kind of establish their own legacy in a way before we bring in any of the characters from other stuff that we've already seen before. But I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't necessarily.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think what I'm not really taking into consideration yet is how many seasons this show is going to be.
Good point.
And now if we had been sort of confirmed like, oh, this is a limited series or anything like that, where it seemed like it was going to be fairly short, then I would definitely assume not. If their intention is to take this show like 3-4 seasons, inevitably, we're going to bring those characters in at some point. But yeah, that's one of the things that hasn't been clear yet. They didn't specifically word it as a limited series or an event series or anything like that, like they did with some of the other shows that were announced at the Disney Investor Day. But this was when they left a little bit more vague. So I think it is probably more likely that we'll get more than one season out of this.
Do you think they'll backdoor pilot things out of this series? Because I mean, Bad Batch essentially was backdoor piloted out of that Clone Wars arc. Ahsoka Tano was essentially backdoor piloted out of the Mandalorian episode where she appeared. So Fennec Shand showing up in the Mandalorian, you weave her into the Bad Batch. So would this be a possibility as we explore this kind of newer area of Star Wars? Look, and this is what people have been clamoring for, right? I don't want to just deal with Skywalker stuff. All right, great. But we're still going to mess around with the around the time stuff and characters involved in this. So do you think they'll find a way to weave in characters that were, attached to all of this as well?
Well, and now that you mention it, I'm sort of wondering if Boba Fett's going to show up, because it would be sort of interesting to see if, at this point, assuming that I guess we know that we're picking up right at the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Boba Fett would be 13 years old. So not much different than what we saw of him in earlier episodes of the Clone Wars as a young child. But it would be interesting to sort of see him and Fennec Shand maybe interact at this young age, and that's how he somehow knows to go find her in season 1 of The Mandalorian. So he might be an interesting one to bring in. But in terms of this whole connecting all of the different stories that are being told in the Star Wars universe, I've heard it referred to as the sort of Marvelizing of the Star Wars universe. People can have their opinions on whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. But I've said this before, that the bigger connections for me as a fan and as like a super fan that's really into the details and really into reading the books, those kind of connections are sort of what make it for me. Those kinds of things are really exciting. I don't need Luke Skywalker in every episode of The Mandalorian, but it's still kind of cool to see him. So it's one of those things where I'm definitely not opposed to seeing some of the other characters we could potentially be bringing into these stories. It's just one of those things where I sort of wonder if, depending on how many seasons we're going to get out of the show, it may or may not be more frequent,
Do we see Vader?
That's an interesting one, because we do see Tarkin, and we know that they kind of hang out in the same circles. So that's a good question. Will he still be clumsy, like wandering around, like not really sure how to use his new artificial wings yet? He's kind of just wobbling around a Star Destroyer.
No, every time he falls down.
You love to see it.
Yeah, right. I've been down with that. I don't know. A very interesting time that they set this in. I wonder if we saw in the trailer, we certainly saw Camino. There were some people have speculated that we're seeing Geonosis and Coruscant in the trailer as some of these planets. But is I don't know, is Alderaan a possibility? Do we have any of these things that are connecting through? Do you think is that a possibility too? Some of these planets that we've seen before, or do you think they'll start to focus on only kind of like these certain number of planets that were new or just kind of lightly touched on in previous animated series?
I'm sure we'll probably make a couple of returns to some other Clone Wars locales. I know that at some point, at least my assumption is that we're going to stop in at Zygeria, I think is where they go to at one point, because we see a Zygerian slaver. He's the one that has the sort of forcey looking whip that he's whipping somebody at some point in the trailer of the Bad Batch. So the assumption is that we'll probably make a trip there. I think the Camino thing is going to be really interesting.
Right?
It seems like this is going to be the sort of first foray into what happened for the Bad Batch, of how did all of this go wrong. I mean, we saw a little bit of that in sort of later seasons of the Clone Wars when the clones started sort of catching on to something fishy going on. But I would love to see a deeper dive into that, or we actually are having, I would expect maybe a more violent confrontation with the Kaminoans, just having seen what we've seen from this group. They're a little trigger happy, but that makes it fun.
Yeah. What about inhibitor chips? Do you think that's in there? Do you think they like, a lot of people have been speculating about what if we'll get any of that? What do you think?
I'm wondering if I would assume that Echo still has his.
Yeah.
I think that would make the most sense. I really don't know what to think
Mm.
about these other 4 of whether or not they would have. I would think maybe I have a feeling it's gonna be an all or nothing. Either they are all
Mm.
going to have them or none of them will. I think it would be sort of unusual for some to have them and some not, but
Right.
that's gonna be an interesting thing to see exactly how this affects them.
Yeah.
Um, Not only in that sense of whether or not they are sort of under the spell of the inhibitor chip, but how they sort of react to seeing what they call the regs, uh,
Mm.
taking out, their Jedi commanders. Should they come in contact with them? I guess it doesn't. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's what we're gonna exactly see with this. It
Well,
kind of seems like maybe.
that's what I wonder about, if we're going to get this thing where they're vacillating between essentially pretending to be part of this situation and being out on these missions, but somehow they kind of help the people they're supposed to be going up against when they're being sent out on these missions. Are they going to kind of navigate certain situations that'll challenge them in a way that they have to kind of decide to choose one side or the other eventually? That's what I'm curious about. And we're seeing them in multiple stages of battle throughout the trailer. Certainly, there's that shot of Hunter kind of standing out from the quote unquote regs on his own. We see a Wrecker falling from something. We know a Wrecker has an issue with heights. We don't see too much of Tech getting involved in any kind of stuff, but that to me is what's going to be curious for me. Is what are we going to see them do? Are they going to separate out? Like, do we get a Wrecker adventure? Do we get a Hunter adventure solo, or are they all going to be part of this in every adventure they go on, and kind of navigate together how to hide in plain sight under the Empire's rule?
I wondered the same thing, and I wondered
Mm.
that specifically when I saw Hunter in one of the shots in this trailer where he's not wearing any of his armor,
Mm.
and he's just
Right.
riding a speeder bike, what looks like through a sort of, random alley or something of Coruscant.
Yeah.
So I wonder maybe if we'll get a little bit of separating and focusing on individual characters. Because we've seen how they work together. We've had our sort of introduction, but we haven't really seen what are they like when they're in a situation solo.
Yeah.
And how do they behave when they don't have, their other, it seems like they're a pretty connected group. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what's it going to be like to sort of separate one out from the rest?
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious of that. Well, let's move on to the Fennec Shand part of this situation. What do you anticipate we'll see from Fennec Shand? She showed up in the trailer. Ming Na Wen was finally allowed to speak about it. She said, "I've been sitting on this for months," announcing that she is coming back. So she will be part of. She's obviously younger in the scene in the trailer, at least the way it's shot in the trailer. It looks like her and Hunter exchange gun draws there in that moment. And so she's a younger assassin doing her own thing. Of course, Fennec Shand, named after the Fennec Fox. If you want to do some research on that, her design, her look, all of that, and the personality and styles of her. So clearly, she lives through the series for quite some time. But this will be curious to see a female bounty hunter to kind of balance the what you would argue is the overall hardcore testosterone of the Bad Batch. So it's going to be a nice balance. Do you think she'll be a series regular and a part of their missions consistently, or just a pop in, pop out character here in the Bad Batch?
I have a feeling she's just going to be a sort of pop in, pop out, but I do
Hmm.
wonder how they're going to sort of balance how you call the testosterone of this group.
Yeah.
I have a lot of faith that they'll be able to figure something out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to be a little bit annoyed if I have to watch a bunch of just dudes on screen for 13 episodes in a row. So I would like to figure out a way to bring in some women into this story. But I'm excited to see Fennec Shand in this. I
Yeah.
read the article too. I think when she was talking about how she's been sitting, or I read the tweet where she said she's been sitting on this information for months. I almost wonder if it's been longer than that. Like maybe it's
Oh
been
yeah.
years, since she originally recorded dialogue. But I think it's going to be a sort of interesting step back for Fennec Shand, where
Mhm.
maybe we see a little bit more of like, she is not quite as polished as she is, because she really is. I mean, she's an incredible sharpshooter
Yeah.
in The Mandalorian, and what we see from her, she rarely misses. So I wonder if we're going to be seeing maybe a less polished version where she's still learning,
Mhm.
and in the sort of early stages of her career. I wonder if we're going to maybe see some influence from Crosshair in that
Mm.
sort of, that maybe they
Oh,
have some sort of, like teacher mentor student relationship at some
Great
point, because
point.
I have a
Yeah.
feeling that Fennec Shand is going to be very young.
Right.
I don't, I don't know how old she's supposed to be in The Mandalorian. I don't know how young she's supposed to be in this show, but I
Mhm.
have a feeling that she's going to be like a teenager
Mhm.
if I had to guess.
Yeah, people didn't remember. I mean, she's a new character. She was introduced in season 1 of The Mandalorian, and then promptly what we thought killed. And then of course Boba Fett brings her back, and she was killed because she thought she could trick the other bounty hunter there who was coming after her. It was his name Tuco Toko. I don't know what his name was. I wasn't a
Toro
big.
Clan or
Yeah, I
something like
was
that. Yeah.
wasn't a big fan of that kind of volley. No offense to Bobby, who I love to pieces, but I think that was his younger brother. It wasn't one of my favorite episodes, but he killed her. He shoots her, and you could argue that he's way less. Obviously, it's his first mission, way less experienced than she is, but he is ruthless. So clearly, there are possible moments where her judgment isn't the best in certain situations, which would be add a nice level of vulnerability and humanity to the character as well, and kind of underdog status at times for her to make the audience gravitate to her and cheer for her even more. So that you might be right on that. Young, learning, trained. She could even kind of pseudo take the place that Ahsoka had in the Clone Wars throughout her journey. She could be another. She could have that kind of similar arc as well as she's coming into her power, coming into her own, coming into her voice as a mercenary and what have you. So that I'm curious to see that, and we might get some origin story of her as well in this, Laura.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that. She's a great character in The Mandalorian. I was so excited to see her pop up in this trailer. So I'm really looking forward to learning a little bit more. I love the idea of her, at least maybe for an episode, sort of being our Ahsoka equivalent, where we're really seeing the story through her eyes. Because that was really, a big thing with Ahsoka in the Clone Wars, is we really got to learn and grow with her.
Yeah.
And I would love to see something like that turn up. Do you have what do you think about like the idea of other bounty hunters showing up in this story, whether it be like some of the bounty hunters we see in Empire Strikes Back on the Star Destroyer, and whether it be any of the bounty hunters that we've seen in past episodes of the Clone Wars? I would be curious to see if maybe we get some sort of glimpse of like Beckett and Aura Singh and the confrontation that happens with them, if we're going to jump forward in time at all. I would be curious to see who else shows up.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see that. I mean, look, it seems like that Star Wars or Lucasfilm and Disney are opening the door wider and wider to explore the different parts of the universe and of the galaxy of Star Wars. Cassian Andor. Andor is going to be a completely different series, but is also going to essentially be a down on the ground gritty series exploring a guy who's a spy, essentially. We saw him in Rogue One kill someone near the beginning of the movie after they got the information they needed. So clearly he's ruthless as hell. So this kind of like anti-hero stuff or gray area that we're exploring here in Star Wars now, I would not surprise me to see more bounty hunters show up in the Bad Batch, kind of introduce more of the tougher side of things, the more closer to PG-13 R-rated kind of side of things. Of course, we're not going to go full R-rated, it's animated series, but still that scene with Echo in the Clone Wars of season 7 connected to, they're essentially, for lack of a better term, I hope I don't get in trouble here, they're essentially raping his mind. And that is a dark moment. Look at that scene. I remember distinctly. That affected me to see that. And it's this idea of taking his thoughts without his permission, using him to essentially to get information to be able to fight off the Republic there. It was hard to watch. So will they explore that with the bounty hunter stuff? Will they kind of take the blinders off a little bit and get deeper and darker and grittier into those stories? And that might be fun to see them show up, but will they push the boundaries of the darkness of a series like this? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it'd be curious to see how dark they're willing to go with it. I think that in the little bit that we've sort of encountered the clones in, some of the books and things, we don't get a ton of discussion about this, but in terms of, the bigger story of like soldiers, we see little hints here and there of like them exploring the sort of PTSD component of it.
Oh yeah, right.
Will we dive into something like that? What they did to Echo, you're right. It was invasive in a really gross kind of way.
Yeah.
So it will be. I'd be curious to see if they sort of dive into that dark component of the show at all. But
Right.
the way that they're talking about how these guys have basically transitioned into mercenaries, I wonder if they're going to take the time to process that at all, or if maybe that's something that we would see in a later season when they're
Yeah.
a little bit more into their groove
Yeah.
as being mercenaries. Because it sounds like that's maybe sort of what's happening with Tarkin in this trailer. He at
Mm.
one point has a very brief conversation. This trailer is so fast moving. That's my only complaint about it. It's just like you can't pause and take in everything because it moves very quick.
Yeah.
But this brief conversation we see with Tarkin, he looks like he's having a very cordial conversation with
Yeah.
them. It doesn't seem like they've been taken captive. Maybe they have. Maybe that's the sort of understanding, and Tarkin's just a weird creep, and that's how he is. But it doesn't seem like it's. I don't know. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like they're sort of enemies at that point. It seems like maybe he's got a job for him, and they're on the hunt for somebody for him.
Yeah, and it looks like they're getting commendations from him too. So what does that mean? Like, what are they pulling off and doing in service of that? And I wonder if what I brought up earlier, that inhibitor chip situation, is this a situation where the Bad Batch are the ones who kind of turn the clones around and maybe turn some of them and to understanding how they're being controlled and what's happening? Am I sounding stupid when I say that, Laura? I don't know. I'm just thinking about it in the long run. Will they be the crew that kind of figures out how to turn all these clones to be individuals, to do things on their own without needing to necessarily be controlled one way or another? Is that possible, or do I sound stupid?
No, I don't think you sound stupid at all. I think that's going to be a really interesting component to explore, because what we see Ahsoka do in season 7 of Clone Wars to Rex
Mm.
is pretty, intense. I mean, she essentially has a machine perform surgery on him, and
Yeah.
imagine the undertaking of having to do that to that many clones.
Right.
I do wonder if we're going to sort of see the process of all of the clones being decommissioned, like
Yeah.
collectively, and then all of them having to sort of figure out where to go in the universe. But then at that point, it's like, do you keep the inhibitor chip? Do they even know that they have it?
Right.
It'll definitely be something interesting to explore. Does the Bad Batch sort of take on a sort of side mission of any time they encounter a clone, being like, hey, do you know you have this thing? Hey, we can hook you up to a
Right.
machine and have it taken out if you want, because otherwise, who knows what you'll do.
Yeah, kind of the matrixy elements of it all. You can take the blue pill or the red pill. Which way do you want to go? We'll show you what's actually happening. We'll show you how you're being controlled in the things you've done. That is fascinating. It's a great thing you bring up the Ahsoka Tano moment there, because she had to kind of do some surgery there to get Rex to come back. And so that's like, will they have to do that? How many clones will they turn around? How many clones will they pull that out of or save? Will they figure out a method to do that, and in their small way be a part of this eventual rebellion that grows in strength as the timeline goes along? That could be curious to explore as well for them, because I don't want to hate these guys. I want to love these guys. I want to be on their side as they navigate all of this. And I wonder if and look, we don't see the Bad Batch in later stuff, Laura. So is this eventually a bunch of clones that gets killed or decommissioned in some way and never seen again? I'm curious if that's how they end this, as a kind of heroic, tragic ending, kind of like the Wild Bunch did, that film from Sam Peckinpah. No spoiler alerts, but let's just say things happen to them all at the end of the movie. So, I mean, like if that's something that they explore with the Bad Batch, that could be a really bold decision as well, and keep them memorable as hell in people's minds. I mean, they did it with Rogue One, so would they have the guts to do it again with something like the Bad Batch?
To send them out in a blaze of glory would actually be pretty interesting to see. And I think that that's sort of balancing, that's going to be the careful art of balancing letting us get to know the characters but not get too attached to them in some way. I mean, I guess you have to balance them in a way that they probably end up being anti-heroes in some ways too.
Yeah.
Or we
Yeah.
see a little bit of those tendencies where you don't necessarily love every aspect of these guys.
Yeah.
I can see that happening more easily with some of them than others. I can't see it happening with Wrecker. I love Wrecker. But I would be excited to see how they play off the ending for this, because that is something we haven't really seen yet. When we saw
Yeah.
it in Rogue One, it was this very sort of sad moment, but to see it happen in more of like a really epic way would be kind of cool for this group.
I think so too. I mean, Nicole, that's how you go out. I mean, you can't have these characters grow old. There's a reason they have people already are loving them so much, because they remind them of these kinds of guys who are at that, apex of their abilities to do what they can do. But of course, they can't keep going forever. And so I wonder if that's how they actually end up wrapping this thing up with them going out in a blaze of glory. And, we've seen already, Laura, we've seen it a number of times in Clone Wars and in Rebels. When Star Wars doesn't have to, they don't shy away from death of certain characters and lead characters and what have you. And certainly that last shot of Ahsoka Tano with all those helmets on the clones, there's the clone trooper helmets on those pikes there. It's just like, oof, that's such a rough moment, so, but they don't shy away from it. So in the animated sense, I'm curious to see if they do that here. It would be, I would love it. I would absolutely love it.
No, it would be really fun. I think that'd be a great way to pull it off. And yeah, in a way that's a little bit more adventurous, more so than sad. And yeah, it's I think balance is going to be the key thing with that. But I would like to see them explore lots of different aspects of where the galaxy's at. Not necessarily, it's got to be in chaos.
Right.
All of these planets, especially ones that were fighting for the Separatists, the entire galaxy has to just be in complete disarray for a while as the Republic transitions into the Empire. And all of these, loose ends get cut and lost and branch off into different stories of their own. Yeah. So I think this is going to be fun. Maybe exploring like how they age twice as fast as the average human. Right. Where sort of are they, I guess, in terms of their development, and how are some of them older than others, and is that going to play part of the story at all? Is exploring that sort of question and figuring out if they can stop that or something.
Yeah, for sure. Any final words on this, Laura? We should wrap up here. I think any things we want to explore, anything you didn't touch on that you want to touch on?
No, I'm excited to see this. I think it's definitely going to be the next thing that we get on screen in Star Wars. Yeah. I'm sure we're going to see this. We're going to see this pretty soon. I'm hoping that we'll get this, an announcement towards the beginning of the year. So fingers crossed that we, are getting episodes at least once a week, and hopefully getting like a full season. I wonder if it's going to be like 22, 23 episodes a season, like the Clone Wars originally was, or if it's going to be closer to like the 8 to 10, which seems to be kind of the sort of, I guess, practice that these Disney Plus shows are going with, which that's fine. Less is more, maybe. I don't know. I'm excited to see where it goes. What are your thoughts and closing thoughts on the Bad Batch?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, excited to see where it goes. I do anticipate an 8 to 13 episode season. I can't imagine they would spend a 22 episode season here. I think they want to release things, have people take a break, savor and get excited for the next thing as we go into the Book of Boba Fett at the end of the year. Then the Book of Boba Fett ends. We take a little bit of break, savor, and then maybe Mandalorian season 3 in 2022 a few months later. So I think that's how they're going through this process with the Star Wars stuff dropping on Disney Plus. And Laura, they announced so many new shows. You got to give them time to breathe. You can't just drop them all one on top of each other. People will get overwhelmed and exhausted by it all. Other than the people covering it, people will get exhausted and not necessarily watch it all, when you're supposed to watch it. So I think that's the danger there, which is why I think they want to take their time with this situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was a one-off. I really would not be surprised if this was a one-off at all, one series, and then they're out as to kind of lay the groundwork for other things coming up. And I wonder if I don't know. No, I guess maybe not. Maybe the Book of Boba Fett, I guess we're kind of done with everything there. So maybe not. I was thinking about maybe a live action appearance by one of them in the Book of Boba Fett. But by that time, they're probably gone for quite some time. So I don't know. Just throwing it out there. Who knows? So they're clones. Who knows? Anyway, all right. Well, there we go. That's it's coming in 2021. We wanted to talk about it, have a little fun with it on this New Year's Eve day as we're doing a pre-recorded episode. In a couple of weeks, we'll be back again. We'll do a first live episode of 2021. Pay attention for that. We might be lining up a fun, awesome guest. Texted with him today to bring on to 2021 and launch it off really well for the Jedi Way. We shall see. But Laura, until then, where can they find you and everything you got going on, please?
Sure, come find me on Twitter. My handle is at @shutup_Laura. The show that I host with my friend Alice is called Force Toast to Star Wars Happy Hour. That's an audio only podcast, and you can find that Twitter handle at Force Toast Pod. Come check out both.
Yeah, that's right. And you can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, hit a like on this thing, hit a comment on this thing, and share it. You know, we're a new Star Wars show. It's building. We got to build a reputation, got to build legacy, got to build, got to bring people in to take a chance on us. And the way we can do that is for you to share it if you're enjoying it. So many of you comment down below, say how much you enjoy our conversations, which really means a lot to me. And I'm sure it means a lot to Laura. So sharing it with other people who enjoy Star Wars would be a way that you can help to keep building the audience for this show and for the channel as well, which we would appreciate. So yeah, Bad Batch 2021, get ready, strap it on. At least there's something positive to look forward to going into 2021. Certainly we got so much coming, so get ready for sure. All right, until then, Laura, what do we got to tell them?
Until 2021, remember, your focus determines your reality.